Story 1. In high school, I realized anyone with a hardworking attitude can graduate with the bare minimum and still obtain the credentials needed for a successful career. As an adult in college, I realized that idiots with money and a silver spoon in their mouths were often fast-tracked to higher positions. It is best to judge each professional you meet on an individual basis and not compare yourself to anyone other than your past self. Story 2. Most doctors, lawyers, and prominent politicians were not C- students. I learned that in high school, they are ordinary people, and that has nothing to do with academics. Story 3. I was about 17 when I realized that asking strangers online leading questions for validation was a waste of time. Story 4. I work with a group of doctors, and most are very relaxed. Some are arrogant and others can be difficult. I have a few relatives who are lawyers. One of them I just don't get along with. That relative has an unpleasant personality and always has, but the others are fine. I assume it's the same with teachers. Story 5. What do you call the person who graduated at the bottom of the class in medical school? Doctor. Story 6. Politicians are not normal people. The majority of them are not. Story 7. In high school, you'd be amazed to see who gets accepted into excellent schools. Story 8. There really are not that many stupid doctors or lawyers. Story 9. An old, wise veterinarian I used to work with in emergency medicine told me that in every profession, there are people who graduated at the very bottom of their class. Sometimes that thought still keeps me up at night. Story 10. I always suspected that, but when I moved into more professional work and had doctors, advanced clinicians, and senior executives as colleagues, it hit me. For a few months, I had waves of existential vertigo watching some wealthy, Ivy League-educated, supremely confident adult mess up in the most inane way. But look around. There is a reason everything is a garbage fire. Story 11. Honestly, it was the moment I became an adult and realized nobody actually knows what they are doing 100% of the time. Titles do not make people superhuman. Some are brilliant, some are mediocre, and some are just winging it like the rest of us. Story 12. My junior high administrators were power-hungry authoritarians. This is not a democracy was their motto. Story 13. How on earth do you get into medical school with a C-? I need to know. Is it money? Story 14. No C student is getting into a United States medical school. Story 15. I remember exactly. Spring 2003, in college. I was convinced the Iraq War was a bluff. It seemed obviously stupid and self-destructive. Even if there was money to be made, I thought there was no way the people running our country would let it happen. Then I saw the cable news network clips of bombs exploding and thought they were just foolish, unpleasant people, the same idiots I went to high school with. Story 16. In college, I realized that having a Doctor of Philosophy degree does not necessarily mean someone is intelligent or a good person. Most of the people I encountered in undergraduate and graduate school were smart and kind, but a few enjoyed exploiting the power differential between students and professors. It was a harsh reality. I had been raised to believe that teachers and professors had students' best interests in mind. The majority do, but some do not. Story 17. I never thought they were anything other than normal people. Maybe you grew up in a culture that really idolized these professions? Story 18. My theory is called 595. The 5% at the top of any profession are the kind of heroes we write movies about. Selfless, courageous, and resolute. The 5% at the bottom are the worst. I would not help them even if they were on fire. We only ever hear about the 5% on either end and not the 90% in the middle. Those are people doing a job, getting by, generally good, and not noticed. Story 19. The first time I saw a lawyer at the grocery store, he was staring at 2 brands of cereal as if he were making the most important decision of his life. He looked so stressed. That was when I realized no one has it all figured out, not even those with fancy degrees. Story 20. Adulthood hits hardest when you realize every job is run by someone who is just guessing with confidence. Titles look neat, but people are messy, and that mix explains more than any grade point average ever will. Story 21. My parents are both teachers, so I was always somewhat aware of teachers as people. The first time I realized teachers could really fail at their jobs was in 11th grade math. My teacher graded homework for completion, not quality, and gave group tests. I hated math and used that class as nap time, and I was able to do that and still maintain a B average because there were no consequences. As an adult, I feel bad about relying on the rest of my group to pass the tests because they had no choice. The teacher system also made things worse for anyone who wanted fair grades. Story 22. First grade was when I had my first bad teacher. She would have us put our heads down and be quiet for large portions of the day. She would not allow us to use the bathroom or get water. She told us how much she did not like us. That was when I realized authority figures were not something special. Even at 6 years old, I was like, what the heck is going on here? Story 23. My father is a doctor, my aunt is a teacher, and her husband is a lawyer, so I figured it out pretty early. Story 24. You will not be admitted to a United States Doctor of Medicine program unless you are an A student in very demanding courses. A top score on the medical college admission test is also required. If you have a pulse, you can be admitted to a Juris Doctor program. Top law schools are very competitive, though. The bar examination is a minimum competency exam. Story 25. Being an A or C grade student means nothing if you do not continue improving yourself. Story 26. When I was 20, my friend and I drank Jaeger bombs for hours. Finally, he said it was time to call it a night because he had to be up at 7 a.m. the next morning to teach his primary school students. That was the light bulb moment for me. Teachers are regular people and enjoy getting very drunk just as much as any other adult. Laughing out loud. Story 27. For me, it was playing music. I was in my 20s working in a factory, good at guitar, and I played with people from many backgrounds. Doctors, a few teachers, no lawyers, and some local politicians who were county and city officials. Music turned out to be a great way to connect with people. Story 28. When I was in college studying to be a teacher, I was about 19 or 20 years old. Story 29. My mother was a teacher, and I have been trying to get her to understand that logic is important since I was in primary school. Story 30. Being part of that group and working alongside others, you are sometimes astounded by how some people have attained advanced degrees. Story 31. A guy in my high school class was a C and B student, but his parents were from a multi-generationally wealthy family. Now he is an orthopedic surgeon just like his dad. Story 32. I suppose from birth. Most of my family members are teachers and doctors. Several of our family friends were politicians. Some of them were wacky, pot-smoking hippie types, which was normal in my family. The only adult I thought was odd was my uncle because he is rigid, conservative, and career military. That was odd in my family but normal to most others. Story 33. Doctors meeting army doctors. Lawyers reading about people who defend Donald Trump and his policies. Story 34. I would say it started in my late teens with other students. I knew a few who were getting grades and school leadership roles, but when it came to life skills and general knowledge, they were functionally useless. I remember when my first neck cyst appeared. I was terrified. A solid lump in your neck is frightening. The general practitioner made me take a body mass index test to tell me I was overweight, then dismissed the cyst and did not arrange follow-up for surgical removal. I left it for a decade until it burst. My current good general practitioner expedited surgical removal, and it turned out I had 2 cysts in the same spot. Story 35. When I turned 18, my sister's ex was an engineer and told me he had poor grades in college, but still obtained a professional license. Soon after, I went to college and low grades were very common. Story 36. When I was young, I had a 4th grade teacher who I thought was not very good at his job. Story 37. I realized around 18 when a high school teacher admitted they had failed college classes. It made me see that teachers and other professionals are just people. It helped me stop idolizing credentials and focus on judging actions. Story 38. It wasn't until I started veterinary school that I realized some of my classmates were idiots and that no amount of education could change that. After I graduated, I learned that grades have surprisingly little to do with actual skill or success. Story 39. At 22, when I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, about 25% of my peers could barely program a loop, yet they still graduated. I then assumed the same was true for most professions. Story 40. In the 5th grade, I realized I was smarter than my teacher. It was an amazing letdown, especially since I liked him a lot. Story 41. I was not impressed by the only Harvard Master of Business Administration graduate I have ever met. The man was a dumbass. I actually cannot wait to meet another. Story 42. You need to realize that being an A student matters very little outside a school environment. Story 43. The day I saw my teacher at the grocery store buying wine and frozen pizza was the day the illusion shattered. Story 44. As a child, I realized I was as smart as, if not smarter than, my teachers. I grew up around engineers and lawyers, so I saw them as normal people. In college, a friend joined a fraternity with several medical students whom I found despicable. They were undoubtedly smart, motivated, and hardworking, but they were driven more by competitiveness and ego than by a desire to help others. They used drugs, cheated, gambled, and did whatever they could get away with. They thought of themselves as better than the little people and felt entitled to whatever privileges they wanted. Story 45. One of the most comically incapable people I know, for example someone who once forgot to hand in half of his final exam worksheets, is now a lawyer and quite financially successful. I met him recently at a high school reunion. He is still one of the least intelligent people I have ever met. Many younger people will eventually realize that financial success has very little to do with intelligence, hard work, or how important a job is to society. It mostly comes from knowing the right people, choosing the easiest and quickest path to the next milestone, and treating work as a simple exchange of time for money rather than from genuine interest. Story 46. I was around 25 when I realized I was suddenly the adult in charge, and I still had to look up how to boil rice. Story 47. I was today years old, and I never thought about it this way. Story 48. Every age. In what way was I supposed to think they were abnormal? I do not quite understand the belief system implied by the question. Do normal people not have jobs? Story 49. This was probably in my early 20s. Once I met people in those jobs, I realized they are just regular humans. Some great, some mediocre, some barely keeping it together. The title does not make them superhuman. Story 50. My disillusionment with doctors came after several of them offered different suggestions and diagnoses for a complicated medical problem. In hindsight, that makes sense, but at the time I had almost idolized doctors as highly intelligent experts who knew exactly how to fix everything. I learned that our bodies and medicine can be complex, strange, and unpredictable, and that sometimes science must be combined with our best judgment. Mistakes happen. It is part of the process. Only after thinking this through did doctors, while still impressive, come down from the impossible pedestal I had placed them on. Turned out they are people like the rest of us. Story 51. I have never thought of them as anything other than normal people. I am not sure why anyone would think otherwise. Story 52. Can a doctor in this chat answer this question, please? When I finished my master's in computer science, I could not get anything less than a B- in any class. I find it hard to believe that a student could skate by in medical school receiving a C-. Story 53. What do you call someone who graduated last in medical school? Doctor. Story 54. When I turned 20, a teacher messed up a lesson. I realized that all professionals have flaws like everyone else. Story 55. I realized it in my early teens. Everyone is just human, no matter the job. Story 56. They attempted to plot my murder because of misrepresentation and lies about my character. For example, falsely accusing me of being a rapist, pedophile, child abuser, and kidnapper. All the while they conducted illegal surveillance and harassment to provoke a reaction. When I began saying outrageous things to make them leave me alone, they became frightened and plotted my murder. Story 57. When I was at university with future doctors and teachers, I thought that in 10 years they might be great influences. But if they found jobs next year, they would be ordinary people. Story 58. At 17 years old, I complained to my physician about heart pains. He pulled out his phone, started searching online, and then used a stethoscope to diagnose me with Sjogren's disease, which I did not have. Story 59. Funny enough, it sank in while I was watching the television show Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. In one episode, Frank Burns, who is always portrayed as incompetent, said he graduated 120th out of 200. It hit me that this happens. Some people just meet the requirements and barely become doctors. There is always a minimum standard, and there will always be those who reach these professions by doing only the minimum. Story 60. What do you call a doctor who graduated at the bottom of her class? Doctor. Story 61. As a child, I believed doctors were much smarter than the average person. When I later met some in person, I realized how true that was. If you tell a doctor, you cannot remove a bicycle chain without breaking it. It is looped through the frame. They will say, "Oh, okay. Yes, I see." While most people who are neither doctors nor mechanics will argue or zone out entirely. Story 62. While serving in the military, my platoon was building a guard tower. A one-star general was up there, and as we hurried to get down, he told me to relax. I put my pants on one leg at a time, like you. Story 63. I started believing that people were like that at 18, but then I knew at 24. Story 64. My mom was a teacher, so teachers always seemed like ordinary people to me. I personally knew most of them. I also work in the medical field, and last night an emergency room doctor asked me, as a laboratory worker, how much spinal fluid he should collect for a patient with suspected meningitis. I gave him the answer, but the whole time I was thinking, you are the damn doctor. You tell me. Story 65. I'm not sure exactly what age, but here's an old joke. What do you call the person who graduates last in their class at medical school? A doctor. Story 66. When you realize that doctors and lawyers have practices and everyone else has to know how to do their jobs. Story 67. In my early 30s, I have to tell doctors what is wrong with me. Otherwise, they do not find it. For example, when I was having a gallbladder attack, they sent me home with a prescription for alprazolam and said it was an anxiety attack. I returned and asked them to check my gallbladder, and they then found the problem. They are just people. Story 68. The old joke is that someone graduated at the bottom of the class. Story 69. I go into any appointment with an unfamiliar doctor or other healthcare worker with zero expectations. Many doctors are eager to get you in, pretend to listen to one issue you have, then usher you out for the next patient's 10 minutes. In my experience, the best doctors are not always the most academically accomplished. There was one I briefly visited while growing up who was in the papers for being the best in the state during exams, but he was otherwise no different from the rest except for extra arrogance. The best doctors I've seen were willing to listen, put in a bit more effort to order a test or scan, and actually discuss treatment options. While a good intelligence quotient is usually necessary for someone to be a healthcare worker, the emotional intelligence requirement is very low. Story 70. I never saw doctors as anything else. Someone once told me something that resonated. You will never know whether the doctor you are seeing was an A student or a D student. They are just a doctor. Story 71. I do not think lawyers are normal people. I think normal people are damaged by lawyers. When people say it was easier to live financially, they mean people could live without going to court and could die without using a lawyer. Our per capita spending on lawyers has increased dramatically, more than doubled. Everyone has been to court now. Legal television shows and so on have contributed to that. Lawyerism is anti-human and has become far too ingrained. This is a problem when dealing with human relationships. There are gotcha concepts and out-of-context word games. Legalism 101. Some lawyers are fine, but the overall situation is not ideal. Story 72. There used to be 3 of us. Rick, Mick, and me. Mick was a very good athlete, the quarterback of the high school football team, but not very bright. He once farted a peanut. He said he was going to study for the law school admission tests and that the questions were very hard. Rick and I answered every example correctly, while Mick missed nearly every one. Mick went on to have a solid law career and was even a district attorney for a while. God bless him. Story 73. I do not really remember Bush winning for the first time because I was 5. During his re-election, I thought that now that he had been president for a while, people would surely have realized he was not very intelligent and was consistently doing a poor job on very important matters. I definitely learned a lesson. Story 74. A doctor messed up treating my grandmother's broken leg. She suffered needlessly because the doctor was incompetent. A knee replacement was supposed to take an hour and a half, but it took 4 hours just to undo the damage. Story 75. I remember the famous engineering student motto, CS get degrees. Story 76. I think I was 16 when I had a magnetic resonance imaging scan and needed knee surgery. This followed my team doctor telling my mother I needed one. I had injured my knee 2 years earlier and had probably 5 or 6 x-rays, during which the family doctor said, "Don't play football if you don't want your knees to hurt." I have known since then that a fancy degree did not guarantee someone was not a dipstick. Story 77. I was 15 years old when I escorted my mother to a chiropractor. He did more harm than good. It was a horrifying experience. From that time on, I studied illnesses, kept abreast of medical discoveries, and asked questions. If I think the doctor is wrong or misinformed, I tell them. I worked in the healthcare industry for years. It is your body, your choice. Get informed, stay current with medical discoveries, and be your own advocate. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.